within the state police. Drunken fights, overtime theft, sexual assaults, and a trooper had installed a hidden camera in the women's locker room at the state police training academy.
Are you on? Which side are you on?
You know, when I talk about the police, a lot of people in my life will tell me that I'm just too hard on the police.
Yeah, I've heard that. Heard that too.
You know, I mean, the cliche is, you know, like it's only a couple bad apples, you know, most of them are good, blah, 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 blah. And but it, you know, it comes in all sorts of different styles and sayings and all this. But, you know, the basic thing is that, you know, okay, yeah, sure, there's a couple bad apples, but really like 99.9% of cops are not only great people individually, but they're actually like, they're exemplar executors of the law, never misuse their power, they're all this, you know, it's all really great stuff. So there have been 3 stories that have been in the news just in the last week. Just in the last week. Now, all of this stuff did not happen in the last week, but these have been in the news because of like certain updates in these stories or you know, milestones, and but they've all been in the news this week. And so let's go through them, because these stories are not just about like this one cop killed a person illegally, or this one cop did this one bad thing and then he was punished for it. No, these are all of these stories are institutional police stories. And so I want to bring them to you just to kind of, you know, because I think the truth is important, and I think that understanding reality is important. And, you know, that if we, you know, like you were talking about with Obama, like if we're not able to reckon with the Obama years, we're not going to be able to move forward as a movement of people that want better for other working people, right? And so if we do not accurately understand the institution of the police, we are not going to be able to make it work for working people, or to have a different institution that is better for working people. And so let's take a look at these stories. First one, the entire West Virginia State Police Department is under investigation for sexual assault and other associated crimes. The entire department, now this is not every county sheriff, right? But the state police department in West Virginia, the whole department is under investigation. From the Mountain State Spotlight. Last year, an anonymous letter was sent to the office of Governor Jim Justice, alleging over a dozen incidents of misconduct within the state police. It detailed drunken fights, office affairs, misspent funds, overtime theft, sexual assaults, and how a trooper had installed a hidden camera in the women's locker room at the State Police Training Academy.
Wow.
The governor confirmed several acts of misconducts among the troopers. State Police Superintendent Jan Cahill has resigned under pressure from the governor, and state police have arrested a trooper on domestic violence charges, and the trooper that they arrested is like the whistleblower. And so he is saying that that this arrest is retaliation for speaking out. And now, you know, both could actually be true, right? He could actually be a domestic abuser, but they wouldn't have arrested him if he hadn't spoken out. And that would comport with what we know about police. Just Google police 40% and you'll see what I'm talking about. But maybe he's not a domestic abuser, and it is really just totally chalked up or trumped up, and it is totally retaliation. But both could be true. He could also be an abuser, and he could be a whistleblower, and they wouldn't have arrested him if he hadn't been a whistleblower. So the Department of Homeland Security is one of the parties that's investigating the state police. Attorney Teresa Torreseva is filing civil suit against the department for charges related to these allegations on behalf of 42 women, including 10 minors. Amazingly, in the midst of the entire in the midst of the entire department being under investigation for these myriad crimes that span the entire organization, Governor Justice repeated what I just talked to you about earlier. Quote from Governor Justice: "We don't need to turn our back on the whole because the bad actors are the few." How can you say this?
Your entire department is under investigation.
Like, this is the leadership of the thing. From top to bottom, they're covering this stuff up, under investigation for covering this stuff up. And the Homeland Security investigators are saying this too, like, oh, we just want to get rid of the bad actors. This is not all that West Virginia cops have been, not all of the notable episodes of misconduct. Here again from the Mountain State Spotlight, one of the most notable cases of misconduct was the work of former forensic technician Fred Zane, who is estimated to have falsified evidence in 182 cases during the 80s and 90s. 182 cases. Now, this is one person, but if you believe that he individually was able to falsify evidence in 182 cases without widespread cooperation, then I have some beachfront, oceanfront property in Arizona to sell you. Right? That's the saying?
Yeah.
Because right, and the thing is that he obviously had support. He was set to be retried on fraud charges related to testimony he gave in a criminal trial when he died from cancer in 2002. In 1999, we're still in West Virginia, State Trooper Gary Messenger II was sentenced to 7 years in prison for beating a McDowell County man who had complained about a party where state troopers were firing their guns at an American Legion Hall in Welch. Justice also confirmed in a press conference last week that the FBI is investigating allegations that a state trooper raped a woman in December 2021. So that's all just in West Virginia, but let's head outside of the South for a moment. In Boston, last week, a lawsuit was filed against several people alleging that a cop and former police union president, which that's important to understand because, when we're talking about whether or not it's bad apples, we have to recognize that these people are elected in many instances by the majority, right? It's definitionally not the few if a majority is supporting these people. He was elected president of his police union. Okay. Last week, a lawsuit was filed against several people alleging that a cop and former police union president was allowed to stay on the force despite widespread knowledge of his sexual abuse of children. From the Boston Globe, the lawsuit names the city of Boston, the Boston Police, the police union, the State Department of Children and Families as dependents, as well as the cop's wife and commanders in the police department and the police union, including former Commissioner Paul Evans and former union head Thomas Nee. The plaintiffs allege that the state's child welfare agency investigated him for sexual abuse in the early 1990s. We're talking like 30 years ago, before he became a police officer, but failed to take steps to prevent him from having any contact with children. The Department of Children and Families investigated him again in 1995, after he had been on the force for a year, and concluded that the evidence supported the allegation that Rose sexually abused a boy, but still failed to take steps to keep him from children, according to the lawsuit filed at the U.S. District Court in Boston. The Department of Children and Families agreed to let a judge vacate a restraining order against Rose in 1996 that was meant to keep him away from 4 children, including the boy who reported being abused, according to the complaint. The lawsuit also points to what victims described as failures by the city of Boston and its police department in their handling of molestation allegations leveled at Rose. Rose is the cop. That's his last name. After a police internal investigation determined the abuse allegations credible. An internal police investigation said, yeah, these allegations of abuse against children are credible. And the city's Office of Labor Relations later upheld the findings. So we've got 2 institutions within the city of Boston saying, yeah, this guy, he probably molested children. This cop. According to the complaint, the Boston police who investigated Rose in November 1995 were told by Frances Rose, his wife, that her husband had been investigated by the Department of Children and Families for abusing a child 3 or 4 years prior, the filing said. The Department of Children and Families launched a separate investigation into Rose in 1995 and concluded that Rose had abused a 12-year-old and referred the case to the Suffolk District Attorney's Office. The Boston Police's Internal Affairs Division, quote, sustained the allegations against Rose in June 1996, but officials, including then Commissioner Evans, did not move to fire Rose, the complaint said. I mean, we're up to like half a dozen organizations saying like, yeah, you know what? This guy is probably a serial abuser of children. This lawsuit follows a Globe investigation published in April 2021 that found Boston police allowed Rose to remain on the force for 2 decades after an internal investigation concluded that he probably sexually abused a child. The Globe reporting also showed that the state child welfare agency's investigators believed in 1995 that there was evidence that Rose molested a child. The lawsuit Thursday was the first assertion that the DCF knew about sex abuse allegations before the cop became an officer. Boston would not say whether the department was similarly aware of the allegations. In April 2022, Rose was sentenced to more than a decade in state prison after he pleaded guilty to nearly 24 charges in connection with abusing 6 children for decades. For most of the time the abuse occurred, Rose was a police officer. He joined the department in 1994 and he retired in 2018. 2018. He was also president of the Boston Police Patrolmen's Association from 2014 to 2018. Decades. This guy was allowed, not only just being allowed to abuse children is bad enough. Like if you're just a random citizen, nobody should be, but to allow somebody, multiple agencies throughout the government, allowing this guy who has the capacity to molest children, continuing to give him a license to kill. Repulsive. But it's only a couple bad apples. Let's go a little over to the east, where in Staten Island, a cop alleges that he was retaliated against both by his union and his department for refusing to participate in organized crime. Something that friend of the show, Jake Grumback on Twitter, was quick to point out, teacher unions don't do, right? Teacher unions do not retaliate against their members for refusing to participate in organized crime. Okay, that's just not something that happens within teacher unions or, really basically any other labor organization. From Staten Island Live, the city's police unions issue courtesy cards to members who then circulate them among family and friends. They are purportedly used as a way to avoid traffic infractions like speeding, not wearing a seatbelt, or in some cases, even blowing past a stoplight. Not officially recognized by the NYPD, the cards have long been viewed as a perk of the job. A civil complaint filed last week in Manhattan Federal Court by Officer Matthew Bianchi, which names the City of New York and former 123rd Precinct Commanding Officer Andriy Smirnov as defendants. He claims his superiors retaliated against him for his stance against the corrupt practice. At one point, the suit alleges, Bianchi was warned by an official within the Police Benevolent Association, that's their union, that he would not be protected by his union if he wrote tickets to people displaying a card, and that if he continued to do so, he would be reassigned. Things came to a head last summer when the plaintiff issued a citation to a friend of the NYPD's highest-ranking uniformed officer, Chief of Department Jeffrey Maudry, according to the complaint. 3 days after this officer issued a citation to a friend of the NYPD's highest-ranking uniformed officer, 3 days later, this officer was moved from the traffic unit to night patrol, which I think we can recognize as like a less desirable duty. Maudry, meanwhile, is in the midst of a department trial surrounding claims he improperly avoided the arrest of a former officer. So this guy who the cop issued a citation to one of his friends, Maudry, his friend was issued a citation by this officer who filed this complaint. Maudry is in the midst of a police investigation about claims that he improperly avoided the arrest of a former officer. But it's only a couple bad apples. It's only a few bad apples. So, look, this is, people need to understand this. That this is real, and this is what the cops do. And the West Virginia IWW was quick to point out in the while commenting on the story around the West Virginia police, that the West Virginia State Police was formed in the early 1900s specifically to fight against the coal miners unions, right? They're not straying too far from their roots, right? Pretty crazy stuff.
It is, yeah. It's disturbing, and I mean, there's just such a disparity in power when it comes to police in this country.
Yeah. Yeah, it's bonkers. It's really bonkers. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.